Thank you very much. Wow, what an intro. Thanks also, Luke. Thanks for inviting me firstly, but thanks also for your plug for television. It was really good to see everyone actually sort of passionately talking about what TV they liked when they were 5, although I was slightly worried when I overheard one of the younger people near to me saying I didn't have a favourite TV show when I was 5, I'd had a favourite hashtag, but there we go. Anywho, have I got a clicker? Yes, I do. Brilliant. So, yes, I'm going to talk about small data, and what I mean by that will hopefully become apparent. I don't actually mean necessarily no data or tiny little pots of data. What I mean is that Freeview is a very unusual company in that we're used in 20 million households in the UK, but we don't know who our customers are. Once you've purchased a device, whether it's a TV or a set-top box, we don't actually have a single customer relationship with you at all, which is quite a challenge, it's fair to say, especially when you see who we're up against. So I think traditionally the people that you might say who are our competitive set would be the people like Sky, Virgin Media, BT, who have absolutely reams and reams and reams of data. They know exactly when people are joining them, they kind of know what they're watching, they know when they're going to leave, so they can pull the appropriate marketing levers to try and make them come back. Whereas for us, we don't have customer data, which is great for customers. They go, well, I don't want to sign up to a subscription, this is brilliant, you know, these guys don't know who I am. However, a bit tricky for us to market to them. Especially when you add in sort of more newer players that we call the OTT, over-the-top services, Netflix, Amazon Prime, these guys, Google Play, Now TV. They have tons of data, you know, absolutely loads of it. You look at someone like Netflix, actually uses that data not just for marketing, but literally to create algorithmically driven television shows. House of Cards allegedly being the first show that was literally driven from their algorithm that they said, right, this is what we need to do to make a show. Not sure Kevin Spacey was the right person to use, but there we go. So what do we do about that? Well, we've got lots and lots of different pots of data. So lots of first-party data. So things like Sparkler, some of you may know of, a research consultancy. They run our panel. We talk to actual consumers, ask them about attitudes, about how they feel about things. Then we have things like, obviously, social media footprint, good old-fashioned email there. So we have a database. Some people choose to sign up to try and receive more information about what's on TV for the night. Some people called Google Analytics data that we get from our website, very successful website. We were, yeah, lots and lots of visitors there. And then we do sort of all sorts of different bits of research. So something that we spend a lot of time on, things like drivers and barriers analysis. So what is it that actually drives people to come to us in our market, or what are the barriers that stops people coming to us? In addition to that, we obviously look at all the more traditional marketing performance metrics, be that, well, perhaps what we were just talking about actually, more traditional brand tracking measures. We work with an organisation called Hall & Partners, part of Omnicom, a big brand tracking agency, and they tell us all sorts of interesting things about what consumers think about our brand, how they feel about it, how do they feel about our advertising. Very useful stuff to help us shape what we do in the future. Attribution 360, which I'll talk about a little bit, and I know that someone else who probably knows a lot more about it than I do is about to talk about it later. Obviously, performance marketing that NMPi look after. We also have other bits and pieces. Engagement Lab's quite an interesting organisation, used to be called Keller Fay, don't know if anyone knows them, word of mouth consultancy, very, very clever people. I'd recommend looking them up, but I won't say any more about them. Then third-party, sort of bigger behavioural data that we use to mix up to get a better picture of how the marketing is performing, what we need to do with consumers. The likes of GfK, I'm sure we know all of them. In our industry, Barb's very important. They look at macro data on what people are watching, which TV platforms they're using to watch that content. We then work with retailers who sell Freeview branded devices, Currys being the largest one, about 30% of the consumer electronics market. We get a little bit of data back from them. People like TGI that we do, we fuse some of our segmentation modelling. And then some of our shareholders were actually owned by BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and a couple of other people. And they provide data back to us, third-party data that we can then use in different ways. And finally, the final sort of tranche of data, I suppose, is future-gazing. A lot of this is trends, what to expect to see in our sector in the future, and how can we adapt accordingly. And I suppose this is the IPA, if anyone doesn't know, Institute Practitioner of Advertisers, helps us do things like work out what is the best way of advertising, what type of advertising, particularly on television, as we do most of our advertising on TV, is going to be effective. So lots and lots and lots of pots of small data. And I know what you're thinking. I thought you said you didn't have any data. We do, but we don't have individual customer data. I think that's what sets us apart in our marketplace. So what do we do with it? We try to look at how we can mash up some of that data to try and derive some insights. I'm not going to run through all of this. Good old-fashioned. I just heard there, Pitney Bowes, 98 years old. This model is actually 120 years old. So there we go, 22 years older. IADA or AIDA. And so when we look at things like drivers and barriers, we look at what is it that's actually driving interest and stopping people coming to Freeview in our category. So for example, you know, awareness. Most punters think, well, who the hell are these chancers? Freeview, never heard of them. Who are they? Well, we're the #1 TV platform, just saying. You know, well, am I going to miss out on all the shows that I love? Well, you know, we've got every episode of Ice Road Truckers, so don't worry. We got the lots. But doesn't it cost a load of money? It sounds like your offer's too good to be true. Yeah, it's called Freeview, clues in the name, free view. So we do a lot of work around trying to address that, mashing them up with all sorts of other data that we have. So this is a tranche of Hall & Partners brand tracking data looking at spontaneous awareness, which we know is a very important antecedent to any particular behaviours that we're trying to drive. And what we do is if we have a campaign that goes up and down with big emotive peaks, that's what happens to our spontaneous awareness. It goes all over the shop. That's one example of how we might mash up these two data sources. So what do we do with that? I hope this is going to play, actually. Well, we use a lot of these data sources to drive the insight for our advertising campaign. And the one that we have on the air at the moment we call the other way. And what this does is sort of chunks up all those different drivers and barriers, how we can address them, both emotional and rational. Is always on, it's hyper-contextual, it's almost like programmatic TV advertising. We then loop that through Attribution 360. We made about 200 ads in the last year and a half, and we can track, using Attribution 360, which of those are effective, which messages, which day parts, which channels, and we can then loop that back into the planning for the TV advertising. Hopefully it's going to work. I'm going to play you one. We made 200 odds, so you probably don't want to hear all of them. Oh well, there we go. It looks lovely, doesn't it? Shot in Bulgaria. There you go. Big camera. Apparently we had 6K, is that right? 4K wasn't good enough. We needed an extra couple of K to shoot this. Whatever that means. Anyway, there we go. It was hilariously funny, trust me. So again, say, what other mashups? And I could talk about this all day. What other mashups do we do? So, GfK, sales data, albeit minus the largest consumer electronics manufacturer. They don't actually, Currys don't subscribe to GfK. So we mash up a bit of their data to get an idea of which products are selling. And then what do we do? Well, we look at how many devices have sold, and then we can find out, we don't directly know what customers are doing with those devices. However, when they connect them up to the internet and they start using catch-up players, we can then tag what they're actually doing. And what we can then do is, and I won't go through all of this, but get a picture of how this conversion from, to the end of last year, there were 3 million devices sold of Freeview Play, our latest service. How many of those are actually putting them on their main set, which is what our shareholders want us to do, and use it for a Freeview Play device? Because there's many things you could do with it. If you buy a TV, you can plug a Skybox into it, whatever. That's our way of finding that out. We use proxy data from, not proxy, proxy data from shareholders. And what we can then do is loop that back into what we do with products in the future, so we can understand about how consumers are using things and then loop that back into our huge technology team of about 12 people. So there we go. I could talk about various different mashups that we do, but so what we do is, oh, I've lost my last slide, never mind. Use various different data sources to try and piece together a bit more about what consumers are doing, how our marketing is working, and how we then, oh, there we go, I'm back, revert that back. Oh, look, here we go. Oh, it's kind of all funny, my font. Trust me, I didn't use a serif font. I'd never do anything quite like that. It's not my style. So yeah, we look for relationships, and where we don't have any, we try to sort of plug those gaps with proxy data that we find. Anything that we know has a correlation with the behavioural outcome that we're trying to drive. We then do lots of experiments, use things like behavioural economics to see which messages play out best with consumers. And as you saw earlier, some feedback loops. The behavioural outcome that you got at the end is not just a behavioural outcome, it's an insight in itself that we can feed back into other things. But then most importantly, I think anyway, don't forget that we're humans. Lots of big data does have its challenges in that I don't think it picks up things like emotional antecedents, attitudes, how people are actually making decisions, and it tends to look backwards, and we use that to regress forwards. So beware of fallacies in big data. Perhaps not in the right place to say that, but I do believe it. Thank you very much.